So, hello everybody, and welcome to the first episode, the very first episode of Street Talk, which is going to be the series of videos by the Urban Violence Research Network, in which we're going to interview experts on topics of urban violence, organized crime, public security, and all the related topics that our network's members are interested in. So joining us today for the very first episode, so congratulations, I guess, is Professor Lucia Dammert. Professor Lucia Dammert is a professor of international relations at the University of Santiago of Chile, has been a global fellow at the Wilson Center, and has been involved with the UN on the board for disarmament, if I'm not mistaken. Correct me if I am, because we invited Professor Dammert because we are now 1 year after the momentous protests that took place in Chile regarding issues such as subway tickets, but then enlarging to really encompass like a lot of issues within Chilean society. Professor Dammert wrote for us, for our blog, Word on the Street, a blog piece last year. So we thought about inviting her for making a little bit of an assessment of the protests, especially for public security in Chile a year later, and understanding how the things are evolving there. So Professor Dammert, thanks for joining us.
Thank you for the invitation. It's great to be the first chapter of this interesting, initiative. So thank you.
Interesting and hopefully long. So hopefully you're going to bring us some good luck. And the first question is really pretty straightforward and is, I guess most of our audience have heard about at least the protests from last year in Chile, but what has changed in the year that has passed between then and now?
Yeah, it's interesting because, we just had 1 year of protest, but in the middle we have COVID-19.
Sure.
And we've been under the lockdown in most of Chilean cities for a long while. Even myself, I've been in my house almost for 6 months already. The social movement was really moving forward, a specific political and economic changes, perhaps last year until January this year. And then we went into, COVID-19 context, and everything kind of stopped. However, before COVID-19, there was a political decision to go into a referendum that it will happen in a couple of days, next Sunday. That referendum, it's regarding changing the constitution. In Chile, we have a constitution that was first written under the dictatorship. And even though we have had some changes, it is still a dictatorship constitution. So this is a huge momentum for Chilean politics and for Chilean society. There has been some public policy changes in terms of economic and social changes, but I have to say that the COVID-19 situation, changed everything, changed all priorities. And as you probably know, in Latin America, and Chile is not an exception, we have been hit hard by the pandemic in economic and social terms. So even though the movement brought the idea that the whole socioeconomic model has to be changed, that idea, I think, was deepened for the pandemic because, the poorest people are dying more than the richest here in Latin America, at least. But the movement on the streets are a lot quieter now than before.
Okay, so is it quieter, but would you say it's quieter, but its case is actually stronger due to the pandemic? Yeah. Or would you say not?
Yeah, I think, the pandemic showed us everything that we didn't want to see for a long time, in the private sphere, in our houses, in society, and in the country, in the world as a whole. I think, these huge inequalities, the very feeble situation of our states, the limitation of our health services, the limitation of our education services. So all those areas that were supposed to be under the market decision, now we know that we need a stronger state. And even urban policy, one of the things that, you know, in Latin America is being discussed is that we had these huge outbreaks because our cities haven't been planned.
Mhm.
And we have these huge cities, that unplanned cities that are actually based on segregation and social fragmentation. So of course, if you have to travel from your house to your workplace 3 hours in a bus, you're going to be contaminated.
Mhm.
So the pandemic further opened the door for discussions regarding the weaknesses and the failure of the socioeconomic system, I think.
Okay, and there's another, like, I was going to ask about the pandemic, so thanks for like anticipating that. There's another global, let's say, phenomenon that has been pretty pretty evident in the past few months, and that's police protests on police reform in other countries. So maybe before going into the impact that movements like Black Lives Matter or End SARS in Nigeria right now have on Chile.
Right.
Maybe first, can you explain what was the movement behind the protest last year asking regarding police forces and police reform last year, and if it has changed now 1 year later?
In Chile, you mean, right?
Chile, yeah.
Yeah. Well, in Chile, the movement on the streets started as a socioeconomic movement, you know, a movement towards changing the neoliberal model, if you will. However, after a couple of days moving into the streets, everyone was a witness of police brutality, of human rights abuses, and discretionary use of power by the police. And then it became evident that the police is not democratic in many terms, that the police uses their force in a very discretionary manner against the poor more than the others. So the movement shifted towards a movement against police brutality, and you can see it. There are plenty of web pages with pictures on the graffitis that were, you know, put in place all over urban Chile. And those graffitis started focused on, you know, changing the models, changing health services, so on and so forth. And then it shifted towards, you know, reforming the police, refunding the police, defunding the police. So it moved towards a different perspective. And this is something that is not new here in Chile, because the police has had a very discretionary / violent type of work. However, I think it was more evident. And then police reform started to be part of the political agenda.
Okay, would you say I've seen that there have been like recent protests, like the start of this month, against police brutality? Would you say that that's like an event that is pushing like for further social movement about police reform?
Well, the thing is that the government and politicians, they caught up into the pandemic mood, and then police reform it wasn't enforced, actually. There are some conversations, and there is a couple of council of police experts, but the situation regarding human rights abuses haven't actually moved forward. So in the midst of October, you know, everyone was remembering October 18th last year, and there was some protest on the street. Even though the police tried to change their tactics, everyone is actually requesting a whole, you know, an overhaul of the police system here in Chile, and that hasn't happened. And my sense is that it's not going to be happening during this government. because this is a right-wing government that is trying to, not to change the structure of power related to the police.
That's interesting, because then I think it's very connected to this referendum that is going to take place, well, 2 days from now. Would you think that the
Yeah.
referendum alone will help to bring police reform in Chile, or will it have to be accompanied by a changing government as well?
Well, yeah, the referendum is key because our constitution now has the law, the organic law of the police within the constitution. So if you want to change anything regarding the police, you have to make a constitutional change, and that requires a huge quorum. So in fact, no one has been able to change, structurally change the police since 1990, when we returned to democracy. So I'm pretty sure that the next constitution will have a different perspective regarding what we understand by national security and public security. Still, that constitution, I mean, if we're really lucky, we will have that constitution in a couple of years. So we still need the political realm to get into some policy reforms, some policy issues that will reform the police before that, in terms of oversight, in terms of transparency, in terms of limiting use of force. So hopefully that will be a discussion that next government will be, implementing.
Sure. Well, actually, I have an opportunity to ask, perhaps, what would be your opinion on how to reform police in Chile? Is it a problem, as you said, oversight, transparency? Would it require more participation on the part of the community? Like, from your point of view, what are the main issues that should be addressed?
The first issue is that we need a civil control of the security sector. Here in Latin America, some police forces are highly autonomous, and that level of independency from the political power and from the government allows them to have a very discretionary way to enforce the law, to use violence, and to be communicating with the community. So first we need to strengthen the social service part, the civil part of the government. And then we need to, at least work on 5 areas. One is oversight. The second is more transparency. Third is the military type of institution that we have now that actually, concentrate the power in a few number of police officers here. Fourth, we need a more human rights issues being more, being not only teach in classes, but also, being constantly being implemented in public order, in investigation and crime prevention too. And finally, we need more women on police forces. That's something that, an element that is always being required, but we need more incentives for them to be part of the police, and then to, to go into the hierarchies of the police. So this is a long-term process. This is not something that is going to be implemented in a few months. So we need political agreement towards, and a stronger, more legitimate police.
Sure. And so we're looking forward to follow what happens in Chile for the next, not only for the next months, but for the next years, really.
Yeah.
I think what you, a lot of the things you mentioned really are very likely to resonate with a lot of our the people in our audience right now, because there are some issues that are really common, like across the globe. So not only in the so-called global South. So that brings me to the final question, and that would be, would you say that, like, what has been the impact of other social movements about police reform on Chile's own social movement? And also, has the Chilean social movement about police reform impacted on other social movements abroad? Because I can imagine that the example, I remember back last year at this point, we saw an enormous amount of demonstrations and protests all around the world. It was in Lebanon, it was in Catalonia, it was in Hong Kong, and Chile was part of them. So as Chilean protests impacted also on some way the protests about, for example, Black Lives Matter that we have seen in the past few months?
Yeah, I would say that there is a worldwide movement towards a redefinition of authority in general. And the police, perhaps, is the backbone of what we understand by authority. And of course, authority equaling authoritarian way of developing or authoritarian practices is out of the question, because new generations, they require the police to be legitimate. They require the police, to represent them, not to be violent, not to be discretionary, not to be, really stigmatizing some groups of society. So I believe that movement, that redefinition of authority in general, is being widespread from media, from blogs like this, from experts, but in general, civil society organizations are discussing what authority actually means. And in that sense, in Latin America, Colombia and Chile, we have had similar situations in terms of police reform. And we are always looking at what's happening in the US. Of course, the Obama administration implemented, this 21st century policing process that was based on procedural justice and making the police better, even though they still have, of course, challenges now. So there is a kind of going and backward process of learning. But one of the most important things, I believe, is that political authorities cannot rely on police force. Look at what's happening now in Nigeria and other parts of the world. The youth are not as afraid of, showing what previously was called disrespect to the authority. They just want a different type of conversation. And in that sense, I think this is a worldwide process. Although authoritarian responses are not as far. Don't forget, Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duterte in Filipinas, what is going on in China right now. I mean, there is also, you have contestation, but you also have some areas of the world that are being actually more authoritarian than ever before.
So you say the verdict on these redefinition of authority is still on. So
it's still on. It's going.
Which side gets the upper hand at some point?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a constellation, and I think that post-pandemic world is going to be a different world based on millions of people on poverty and out of job. So in Latin America, we will go back 3 generations in terms of economic development. So I'm pretty sure we will have some turbulent times coming to us.
Okay, I was really I think we can finish the interview here, because it's kind of a mixed bag at the end of the interview. So there's this final remark on turbulence, and I can imagine it's pretty accurate, because I mean, with everything that is going on right now, it seems like a safe bet. But I really like your optimism about the younger generation really not tolerating anymore the more authoritarian side of government and of police, and these redefinition of authority idea is really, really interesting and original. So I'm pretty sure who's watching us right now has liked it as well. So
thank you
very much for your time. And this has been Andrea Varsori. I'm one of the co-coordinators of the Urban Violence Research Network. Stay tuned, because we're going to have many more videos coming up on these issues. Thank you again to Professor Dammert for her time and her contribution.
Thank you, and good luck.
Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Bye-bye.